Morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. We're just getting the webinar fired up, and Dennis is my co-presenter, but he couldn't be here in person today, so he's going to be online. And hopefully, if anybody has questions, I don't know if you know Dennis Feeney, but he works for the Community Service Consortium down in Corvallis, and he's a BPA proctor. He's a trainer for BPI courses, weatherization, dare sealing, duct sealing, PTCS. He's a healthy home specialist trainer, and he's a great resource. He actually does some QC for us down in the Corvallis area. So I asked him to kind of help out in case people had questions around the proctoring, and he's got a lot of knowledge around this. And with low income weatherization, they're required to do 62 to 2013 all the time. So he's got a lot of experience with it. We're doing this in collaboration with the Home Performance Guild of Oregon this year. So I wanted to give Don a chance to come up. He's got a couple announcements, reminders for everybody. And then we'll get things going. Hey, Don, yeah.
Come over there.
There's a
camera right there.
Yeah.
How's it going? Good morning, everyone. Say good morning.
Morning.
All right, it's pretty early. Thanks to Inhabit for getting this Techie Breakie started again. It adds great value to the industry. So thanks to Inhabit and particularly Jason and Ryan for getting this organized. The Home Performance Guild, if you haven't got your newsletter or if you're not a member, please let me know. We want you to know about our regular meetings. We've got one today at noon. It's the second Thursday of every month. This year we're doing something a little new. We forecast every single meeting, its location, its time. Some are lunch, some are in the evening, and some are not happening at all. For example, in June and July, because why bother? We're all out and doing our own thing. If you're a member, I'm actually going to add you to a calendar entry, so you don't even have to really think about it. It'll just pop up on your agenda, and it'll be really easy to make sure you're there. But we've got, same thing as last year, conference coming in the fall. We'll have a summer party in August, and so on. So that's all. I just wanted to give you sort of a little agenda update for the schedule of events that we're doing. We're going to continue to work with Jason and the team here for the Techie Breakies to make sure that there's lots of great content coming to you from around the industry. And thanks for this opportunity to say hi.
So, and we're still putting together the list of seminars or sessions that we want to do. So if you guys have particular things that you want to learn about, we want to put together stuff that's really relevant for you guys in the field and our industry. So we chose kind of a meaty subject, a lot of content around what BPI decided to do with their standard, what we've all been really used to, the building analyst standard for so many years. And so what I'm going to try to do is go through a number of questions.
Let's advance manually here for a second. Should be good now.
So these are the questions I want to cover. And if you're thinking of some questions in your mind that isn't covered here, just keep those ready to ask. But this is kind of what got me into looking into this really deeply, is these are the questions I've had over the last years. Why did BPI change the standard? What was the thinking behind this? What's some of the history? And me, Ryan, and Danny talked with a couple people over at BPI on the East Coast to get some insight. What's the difference between these standards, between the BA and the 1200 standard? And the handout that I passed out, I got from BPI, which really is a great, if you skim through that, you probably won't even need to read the real standard. And it goes over like what are the main changes and what are the big paradigm shifts that they took. And then what details should you guys pay attention to? What is ASHRAE 62.2 and how is it calculated currently? So I'm going to do a little bit of a history on this, and what are some really best practices to follow when you boil this all down? What tools can you guys use to calculate so you don't have to do it by hand? So there's a few tools out there. Like once you've done it by hand, you don't need to do that every time unless you really want to. I'm going to show you how to do it by hand, but also show you the tools that you can use. And are there some relevant case studies around IAQ? So I also looked at a couple callback issues that we had that were around IAQ, and then looked at the number comparisons to see like what if we had followed like a more conservative standard, did we attack the source issue enough? And I think this will kind of help bring some stuff together. And then how do these standards fit in with our program and you guys as a business? So I put this photo together. This is a bunch of us learning how to use retro tech equipment, and we developed our own questions at that time, and it was a new thing to learn. But once we learned it, you start doing this stuff every day, it becomes part of your nature. So what I'm not going to spend a lot of time covering is like different mechanical strategies for meeting the standard. You guys have put in a lot of mechanical equipment. I'm going to have like a couple slides on that, but I'm not going to go into depth of all the different technology and equipment and products that you can choose from to put in mechanical ventilation. So if we get some questions around that, maybe we'll have a discussion around that because you guys have a lot of experience, but I'm not going to try to teach you guys how to install or go over product lists that you guys know a lot about, unless we have questions about it. Okay, so we all have seen this standard many years. I think the first time I saw it was in 2007 or so. BPI developed the BA standard as like one of the first national standards around how do you audit a house and do diagnostics. And they designed this, it was primarily designed for like doing comprehensive retrofit. So when you read the standard, it really takes the position of this is what you do, this is kind of how you develop a little bit of a developing work scope, and this is what you have to do on the back end. But still there's some stuff that's vague about that. It was really written in coordination with early programs like NYSERDA. NYSERDA was like really like the first home performance program, and a lot of the folks on the East Coast who are building science colleagues were all working in coordination, and NYSERDA was really the flagship program. When we read the standard, it's really Northeast focused. It's really focused on gas and oil heated homes. The details are really open to interpretation. There's not a lot of sourcing of against ANSI codes or local codes. It's really vague around that. It's not really adaptable to every type of program and state. There's a lot of states that there's a few states that won't even allow a technician to drill the flue or the B vent off of the water heater. So they have the standard, and then there's technicians like we can't even touch the flue unless we're have the certification to work as an HVAC contractor. It's not compliant with other types of standards like ANSI. So these were some of the things that they had to tackle. And what they did is they started about 8 years ago. They convened a technical committee, and Bill Krause was on this committee to basically rebuild the standard. And the goal was to develop a minimum criteria for a comprehensive audit. And what they were trying to do is they wanted to differentiate themselves from other types of audits. So they wanted to differentiate themselves from people doing a utility audit that was clipboard, so that when somebody's saying, hey, we do a comprehensive evaluation of your home, we'd say, okay, what standard do you follow to do that? And that's what BPI wanted to do. They wanted to create a standard that really differentiate themselves, and it was clear, it was more adaptable to other types of programs and states. It's compatibility with ANSI, so they worked really hard to get this ANSI collaboration going. It's really evident if you read through the standard, all the different, they quote a lot of different other types of ANSI standards. And it's much more procedural detailed on how you conduct the required inspections and diagnostic testing. So they took out some of the vagueness of it, and when you read it, it's a completely different type of document than the VA standard. And I didn't print it out for you, but I have the links if you want to read through the standard and familiarize yourself with it. I found it very hard to read. It's like in a very outline type format, and they tried to make it so you could source every line in there, and it's just a different type of read than what we were used to. So a little bit of history. BPI started, putting together a group of folks in this industry in the early 90s. They created the first standard in 1999, 2000, and then BPI's new standard came in around 2012 or so, and then now, as of the beginning of this year, this BPI 1200 standard takes the place of the BA standard. If we overlay that with what we've seen in our history here in Oregon, or Energy Trust started doing residential energy programs in the early 2000s. They started a home performance program, 2005, 2006. And this is about when some of us entered the industry. When I went over to work with the Conservation Services Group with Energy Trust. CWP, or the Pilot Portland program, started in 2008. We get this ARA funds that really spurred all this BPI certs across the country. So they went from like a few thousand certs to like, I don't know how many, but many thousand. Clean Energy Works Oregon started in 2010. There's a lot of folks in the room here are part of a lot of these programs early on, and then they started developing new standards, and here we are, 2016. So key differences: BPI 1200 is a front-end standard. Its focus is evaluating the home. It doesn't tell you how to develop work scopes, what you need to do on the test out, how you project manage. It is not there to tell you what to do. It's there to tell you how to evaluate the home, to properly figure out what the priorities are and address health and safety issues and make recommendations. It details how you do inspections and what its sources, different types of inspections that you can do. It lists the actions that must be taken if certain conditions are present. So if you have high carbon monoxide, what are the actions that you take? It describes recommendations that must be included as part of your findings. It does not provide requirements related to actual retrofit. The BA standard crossed into this. It kind of told us, look, we have to do these things when we're putting together work scope. So to me, like, this is a real key, like, split off. Now, what's kind of confusing is that there's two standards. One is the 1100, which is called the Home Energy Auditing Standard, and one is called the Standard Practice for Building Analyst Building. To kind of sum it up, this is more of like a general guideline outline that tells you all the things you need to do in an outline format to do a comprehensive. And then it also talks about their code of ethics and alignment with when you score a home. They align with the home energy scoring system that the DOE uses. The 1200 standard is really the full blown out detailed criteria list, procedures for how you conduct the audit. We asked them why they created two, and it's kind of like they said, well, there's other standards out there for how you audit homes, and so we just basically built this so that if somebody needed a quick outline on how the minimum criteria, you can still use other types of standards that are out there for procedurals like diagnostic testing. It still makes it a little bit confusing, but it's what we have to work with. So this kind of just goes over the 1100 standard. It just gives you the basis of why they created it. The goal, and right here, this is straight from it. The goal of the standard is to direct the energy audit to develop a comprehensive list of measures, which lead the whole house, building science-based home performance upgrades to existing detached single-family dwelling, and then it's used in conjunction with the 1200 standard. So when we get into the 1200 standard, I put this outline up here because you'll notice it's a lot more stuff than what was in the BA standard. They spend more time on health and safety. They have a lot in there about what you need to disclose to the homeowner, including conflicts of interest, any health and safety issues, priority lists. They do a little bit on cost-benefit analysis if you have access to the utility bills. Prioritizing recommendations. This section 7 is really huge, which is around combustion safety. What's good for us, and I'm going to go over, is that the combustion safety testing got more like trimmed down, but the content in the standard got really detailed. So, and I'm going to go over some of those things. Indoor air quality and ventilation, which is where the 62.2 comes in. Moisture control, they give you a little bit more leeway to identify mold, which where the BA standard did not. To look at source problems for moisture, to identify mold, make recommendations around that. And then get into the heating and cooling, building enclosure. And then there's also baseload energy efficiency if you have access to their bills. And they do talk about water conservation, which is new to the standard. three things that kind of sum it up. It's more specific, detailed. It talks more about equipment requirements, like what actually the equipment has to be rated for. Test procedures are more detailed. Summing up the big combustion safety updates, ambient CO action levels have changed. There's no more appliance draft testing, no longer required to actually test the draft. And they removed the CAS depressurization limit, so like our dreaded limit of like not hitting -5, that doesn't exist anymore in this standard. They updated the testing for spillage and worst case. I'm going to go over that. They added a lot of visual inspections, like looking at the flue, looking at the equipment, making sure that everything's set up correctly. So it's a little bit more like making sure that you're looking at the rise of the flue, corrosion, and a lot of more key things that you guys know how to look for to see if there's a problem. And then CO levels have changed. Now they've switched a lot of them to CO air free. So you need a device that actually can measure CO air free. Most of the Bacharach and others do that. And then they align their ventilation assessment with ASHRAE 62 to 2013. So one thing I got from talking with a lot of industry professionals about this is that, and this is straight from BPI, is that the guidelines standards may be required by the authority having jurisdiction. And what that means is like, these are BPI is making recommendations, but they still recognize that there's programs, utilities, code that may trump this. So, and when he wrote this in, it says basically it makes it clear that an auditor can still be considered in compliance with the standard if she or he has to perform certain portions of it differently than indicated due to program code or requirements. And a very specific one is the ASHRAE 62 to 2013. NYSERDA doesn't require that standard for their houses. There's places in Florida that don't do it. And I'm going to go over in the BPA utilities, they use their own version of the calculation. So, and BPI is fine with that because they're understand that there's authorities having jurisdiction that are based on local findings. All right, some of the general requirements. They want you to conduct an interview with the homeowner, which we all do. They disclose any presence of health and safety hazards. You want to put together a report with your results and summaries. Prioritize recommendations and give people information on programs, incentives, any regulations or energy costs. If you have utility data, they'd like people to do baseline energy use analysis. Does anybody do that kind of work looking at utility bills? Maybe a couple folks. A lot of us are used to just looking at the bill and kind of getting an idea. They want you to recommend health and safety measures. And they actually allow you to trump this over energy efficiency, which I think is really interesting. They put a lot of emphasis on you can recommend health and safety or homeowner priorities over maybe cost-effective measures. And then they want you to advise homeowner and occupants on user-controlled energy reduction, and that would be like how they use their lighting or thermostat settings. So some of those testing equipment requirements that I talked about, they got specific with the gas leak detector about its lower explosive limits and when it would alarm. You have to have a CO monitor that has the nitrogen oxide filter, because that if you don't have that, it can mess with the carbon monoxide reading. A lot of the devices, when you buy them now, have them. If you don't have one, you can buy a filter kit to add to yours. The carbon monoxide monitor needs to be able to measure CO air free and also carbon monoxide parts per million. They need to be able to measure both of those and the oxygen levels. Dennis was pointing out that they actually point to an ANSI standard for how to do blower door testing. We've never actually read this one or the duct leakage. They point to one from ANSI, they point to one for a Canadian one, and also from ResNet. So there's 3 different standards you can use for how you run a blower door. I have a feeling that they're all real similar to the way that we're all trained, but I haven't dug really deep into that. And then they also include a temperature rise test on the furnace. And actually, this was something like every time I read it, I find something different. I was talking to Zane because he was spending some time going through this, and he pointed this out.
Jason, I have a question.
Yeah.
So if we don't perform air sealing, then we don't have to run the blower door. Is it okay?
I'll get to that in the end. Yeah.
Okay.
So more of this is like what BPI, what their changes are than the front part of this presentation, more than what our requirements are. So I want to more inform you guys about their changes, and then I'll talk a little bit about our requirements. They also are really big on the CO ambient level. Like when I went and got recertified, you have to constantly say, I'm checking the ambient CO levels, like everywhere you go. I'm in the CASO, I'm checking the ambient CO levels. So they really want to nail it home that you should be wearing some kind of ambient CO monitor that isn't your Bacharach or your combustion analyst. So the action levels have changed. It used to be like, you'll see at the bottom it says 35, you had to like get out of the house. You know, inform the homeowner that there's some kind of issue and get out of the house. Now they have 3 different things: 9 to 35, advise client, check source, open windows, recommend servicing. But it doesn't say anything about getting out of the house. 36 to 69, auto show advise client, and the same kind of thing, turn off the CO source, recommend servicing, and then if it's 70 or greater, then it's to terminate the inspection. That's a really high level. I don't think anybody in here is going to feel comfortable. You know, if I see 9, I'm getting uncomfortable. So, this is again like these are guidelines, but you know, we don't expect anybody, or you don't expect any of your employees to be in a house that has carbon monoxide. So, I would lean more towards like if you see 9 to 35, it's probably time to stop what you're doing, turn off the CO, inform the client, get it serviced. There's no point in being in a house at 35 parts per million for a couple hours. So this is something that I struggle with, but I understand why they put this together the way that they did.
Can you elaborate on that? Why do you think they adjusted these action levels so far?
I don't know, but from talking with BPI and talking with Dennis and others, the standard tried to align with an ANSI, or they did. So that means they had to make concessions. That means they had this technical committee that they convened with all these different partners, and so they're trying to meet the manufacturers of all the products that we're putting in. They're trying to meet the utilities, and so they made some concessions to align with all.
And 35 is OSHA's 2-hour limit.
2-hour limit.
So if you're in a space, if you're working in a space, you can work for less than 2 hours at 35 parts per million.
Okay.
So that gives.
Well, Jason, it says open the windows. Once you open the windows, hopefully the level will go
You
down.
open the windows and you'll dilute it.
Yeah.
But you know, you go down to the basement, you don't have windows to open. You know, or it's just use your best judgment around this. I think EPA still is. They say you can't have 9 or more over an 8-hour period. So kind of like an order of inspection that they're saying is, you know, calibrate your equipment outside, measure the ambient air, test the piping for leaks. If you have an oil tank, you do some inspection of the oil supply. You visually inspect the combustion appliance zone. You set it up in greatest depressurization. They got rid of the worst case terminology. They call it greatest depressurization. You do your combustion appliance safety inspection. If you have a solid fuel burning appliance, such as like a wood stove, you inspect that, and then you place everything back in operation.
Jason, how would we inspect a wood stove?
I think that when you read it, it's mainly like, how is the flue connected outside?
Visual.
Looking for corrosion. Pretty general stuff. It's more specific in there, and I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at that. The CAS testing, as we know, got simplified. You do more visual inspection. You set up the house, the CASO, in greatest depressurization. You test for spillage and undiluted CO levels. You check the action levels for spillage and CO threshold. There's a chart you look at. You don't test for spillage in natural conditions anymore. They got rid of that. So if you fail worst case, that's it. There's no draft testing. There's no depressurization limits. So everybody I talked to has mixed feelings about it. I kind of like the simplified version. But there's still times when you may want to run a draft test because there's some kind of issue with the fluid, and you may be able to find out something, or there may be, you may want to look at the depressurization. If you get negative 15, there's probably something going on that's worth, looking at. So here's a little bit more detail. Set up the house in the greatest depressurization. So house is in winter conditions, turn on the exhaust fans, then you turn on the air handler, and you basically close doors that have supplies in them. You open doors that have an exhaust fan in them, and then you test. And then what it says is if you're more negative with the CAS door open, you leave it open. If it's more negative with the CAS door closed, you leave it closed. So that's like the last thing you would check. You get your greatest depressurization. You can write that down, and then you start with the smallest BTU unit. You lit the water heater if it's the smallest fire for 2 minutes, and if it spills, it fails. If it doesn't spill, you pass. Then you go to the furnace, and if it's warm, you get 2 minutes. If it's cold, you get 5. So a cold furnace, 5 minutes. Should be able to draft in 5 minutes. I wrote over here that they have a procedure, like if you have a second appliance, you want to keep the first one firing while you're measuring the second one. Then you go and you measure the CO, the undiluted CO, after 5 minutes of operation. So you've tested these things for spillage, and then all your combustion equipment's running for 5 minutes. You can go in there and you can stick it down into the throat of the water heater and measure. If the CO level is at or below the threshold in the table, then you're accepted. If it exceeds, then you're unaccepted. You'll notice the thresholds are a lot higher. And I think that kind of goes back to some of the manufacturers. I mean, I think all of you have been in that scenario where we measured like a boiler or a condensing furnace or a tankless water heater, and it was like really high. And then BPI came out with this other document that said, well, if the manufacturer says that that's within the limits, then we'll accept it. And so BPI had developed all these exception documents that Bill had access to, and he was always pulling out for us to read. And I think a lot of that got incorporated into the new standard. And then after you're done, you put everything back in operation. So
Seems
here,
like it's more in line with true honest to God risk out there too.
Yeah.
They had us jumping through a lot of hoops that were a little overwrought.
Yeah.
And so, but it's important for us to have the skill, but to do it on every single house doesn't necessarily fit.
right. Yeah. That's what they wanted. They wanted to be more adaptable to the industry. Let's see. Here are the action levels for if greatest CAS depression occurs with the air handler on. They give you some actions that you can follow, like conduct further analysis of the distribution system, determine if the leaky ducts have something to do with imbalances. We're pretty familiar with that. And then a lot of it is, if so, then make recommendations. So like if you go into a house, the CAS zone is in a closet in the middle of the hallway in a ranch home, and it's getting like negative 20 depressurization. You're having a spillage issue with the water heater. You probably have a return somewhere that's sucking a ton of that air that you need. And then, you can do some balancing, or you may need to recommend going to power vented units. The other table that it references is, you can see these are the threshold limits for carbon monoxide now. A water heater is 200 parts per million air free. I don't remember, what was it before with the PA? I'm trying to remember. Does anybody remember what it was for any of these?
25 to 100.
25 to 100. An oven is 225 parts per million. So a couple of them are still doing parts per million. There's a refrigerator in here.
It's for
See those all
propane.
the time.
Propane refrigerator.
Propane.
You also notice something new in here: unvented room heater. This used to be in BPI's BA standard. They didn't allow them. If you had an unvented room heater, you couldn't do any work. Now they've aligned with an ANSI standard, and if the unvented room heater meets an ANSI standard and it comes in under this 200 parts per million air free, then it's allowed.
Okay, some CO is healthier than others.
What's that?
Some CO is healthier than others.
Yeah.
It's organic.
It's not as bad.
It's free range.
If you get an unacceptable CO level, then advise the homeowner. Should be serviced. If If you don't exceed 70, then you can still test and hang out in the house. That really makes me uncomfortable. I personally am not hanging out in the house at 70. So,
On the floor.
if you get acceptable CO levels, then no action is necessary. Any questions about that? Okay. In the printout that I gave you guys, there's a really good visual overview of how to do the CAS testing. It's at the back. It's really good. I went out and tried it with one of the new auditors from Phazon recently, and it's really nice to walk through, and it makes it easy. It's not completely up to date to the latest and greatest standard, but it meets the spirit of it. So the additional ads that I threw in here, and there's a bunch of them. If you read the standard, you'll find different things every time. It's kind of like reading the Energy Trust spec manual. You'll find something new in there. So we allow unvented heaters if they meet this ANSI standard. Prioritizing recommendations based on homeowner goals, health and safety, and cost effectiveness. This really fits our industry well, especially with making a lot of home and renewal upgrades. If we're seeing that the homeowner's prioritizing something over something cost effective, this is saying like that's acceptable. If it's a health and safety thing and that's trumping some of the energy efficiency things, let's get the health and safety thing fixed. A lot of importance informing clients of existing conditions, health and safety, any conflicts of interest. The conflict of interest for most of you guys would be that you're doing the audit and you're also bidding on the work. But it's pretty clear from the beginning, working as a contractor. Has anybody had a scenario where the homeowner didn't understand that you were actually giving them a bid?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it comes up every once in a while.
They thought I was an inhabited employee,
Okay.
like a state employee.
Visual inspection of existing EPA guideline compliant radon systems. So this is a new ad. So if they have a radon system, then you're supposed to look and see if it's EPA compliant. We have a checklist on what makes a compliant system that we can provide people, but it's not always clear. Some of these systems were put in years ago. This one actually I went out to had an Energy Star label on it, but there may be other things that make it non-compliant. So I think you're supposed to look at these, and if there's something not compliant about it, you're supposed to inform the homeowner. Visual inspection of existing knob and tube wiring and electrical hazards. I feel like most of us are pretty comfortable doing this or pulling an electrician in if we see something that makes us nervous. Evaluation of exhaust fan terminations. Again, it's something that we're pretty comfortable doing. And evaluation of moisture issues, and they actually say presence of mold, and they did do that in the VA standard. So, all right, and that brings us into their ventilation update. So, any questions about the BPI changes?
The
Yes.
presence of mold, how are we supposed to state that?
I would always use this word. It appears you have a moisture issue, and if you say mold, always say it appears. You have some kind of moisture complication, and I focus more on the source problem. I would not try to spend a lot of time like describing it as mildew, mold, black mold, or whatever. I would say more it appears you have some kind of moisture problem. That kind of gets you out of any type of like mold expert. Most of us know what it looks like. A lot of it's surface level. So a lot of it you scrape on it and you can see the wood right underneath it, a couple millimeters down. That's surface level. Rot and wood rot and stuff is a different problem. But I like the phrase. It appears you have some type of moisture issue. It could be mold.
So they aren't requiring us to say.
No, but it does allow you to talk about it. And I would use your comfort level around that. Yeah, Chris.
The homeowner could have it tested before the lab.
You could have it tested. You could recommend having it tested. Yeah.
Well, didn't we have a speaker once who said, "Don't test it; it's a waste of time." Or mold is bad, basically.
Yeah, George Songus has been in here quite a few times.
Basically, just get rid of the source of the moisture.
Yeah, I mean, all of us, with the building science training that everyone has in this room, everyone knows that mold will not grow within this range, and healthy homes fall within that range. So I think your comment is dead on, Jason.
And you can always lean towards the most conservative approach. So you go in a house, there's mold growing around. Houses like people keep it really cold, a lot of humidity. Don't run the blower door. This is making a recommendation that lean on the health and safety. I don't freak out as much when I see mold anymore, but a homeowner will really freak out. And if they see you saying things like, "Oh, you got mold everywhere," they're going to freak out. If you focus more on like, well, let's try to find the source problem. Let's work on getting your house heated to 70 degrees so that you don't have this problem. Let's exhaust your fan. We can get somebody to come in and clean the mold. But it's still kind of dicey because it depends on the homeowner, and some people may freak out. Yeah.
High occupancy levels in smaller homes with flimsy windows is often a problem.
Yeah.
But
In the two case studies I'm going to go over, both of them had mold in them, and we were able to resolve it. And actually, Jim helped me with one of them. He's going to remember the one.
Oh, yeah.
So the ASHRAE 62.2 standard, the link is on here. We'll make sure everybody has copies of these slides if you want to go read it. American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers put this together. It basically helps us figure out what the acceptable indoor requirements for acceptable indoor air quality for a low-rise residential building. This is the real critical part of this standard. It was originally created in 62.2, was created in 2003, and the one that we're used to is 62/1989, but it wasn't specific to low-rise residential buildings. This is what the BAS MBL standard is based on. So the full purpose of the standard is to find the minimum requirements for mechanical and natural ventilation systems, so that the building envelope intended to provide acceptable indoor air quality for these type of buildings. It helps you calculate what the continuous CFM would be for a home to maintain the air quality. And it's also very clear that doing this does not necessarily remove all risk of having an indoor air pool. You still want to deal with the source problems. So there's a ton of things that we're familiar with around mold spores in your house, you have DOCs, different solvents in your home, cleaning products. People sometimes can pull out outdoor air into their home. That's like if they're near a train track or industrial. You've got indoor cigarette smoke. You've got a lot of people deal with animal hair and dander, dust mites, combustion gases, carbon monoxide, radon. So we want to figure out how we really dilute these down or eliminate them. And then the research has shown that the number of occupants has a higher impact on it than the volume. So they put a little more heavy weight on the occupants. So how does this timeline look? Okay, so 1989, ASHRAE came out with this, the 15 CFM per person or the 0.35 ACH, so we're familiar with that. 2003, they said, okay, look, we need to develop a standard specifically for low-rise residential buildings that meets ANSI. And then in 2010, that's when a lot of us started hearing, 62.2 2010. And they said, okay, it's 0.01 the floor area plus 7.5 times the bedrooms plus one are occupants. So then they changed it. They adjusted it to 0.03 times the floor area. So they added a little bit more floor area into the calculation. I'm going to go through this. This is how this all looks overlap. So, if you want to look at the timeline of BPI, ASHRAE, and our programs, just kind of give you an idea how these things kind of line up. So, here's the section that we're familiar with. When you calculate the BAS, you're looking at the volume or the number of occupants, whichever is greater. And then this is also used by programs like the Energy Trust when they compare it to the ventilation potential of the home. So it's pretty much the same, except BPI had guidelines that say if it's 70 to 100%, you just have to recommend below 70 you have to mechanically ventilate. So this was the kind of the deviation from what the Energy Trust was using, unless you're doing home performance work. Then they say, okay, well you can follow whatever BPI follows.
Jason, what's ventilation potential?
Ventilation potential is the blower door number divided by the in factor, right here. CFM natural. So you find out what your blower door is divided by the in factor, and you know, like the MVL says you're supposed to be 60, but you're only 40, then you're below, and you got to make up the difference. Dennis pointed that he brought this to my attention that it's also called building tightness limits that was developed with Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And they did this in the mid 80s, same time around. ASHRAE came up with that original 6289. It was each occupant, they didn't even look at the volume, just each occupant needs 15 CFM. And we believe that George Songas was involved in this research. But I haven't really called him to confirm it, but it was on the document that we read. And then a lot of us are familiar, you can convert between ACH natural, ACH 50, CFM natural, and CFM 50 just using the in factor. The in factors, you know, look at what region you're in based on the stories and whether you're shielded or not. We kind of have fallen in this 19 to 26 range in Oregon, or at least in the valley. I got this chart from the Energy Trust because I think this is really interesting to look at. Is that if you look at this outdoor temperature over time, this is kind of your seasonal fluctuation. The blower door really just gives you a snapshot of what the ventilation in the house is naturally. But at different times of the year, you're going to have more infiltration than you would. If it's 70 degrees, how much infiltration are you going to have between the outside and the inside? There's not a lot of movement of air. And most people have their doors open and windows open most of the time. So it kind of looks at different CFM levels, thinking, oh, well, I'm 4,000 CFM, I'm going to have a great number, a high amount of ventilation throughout the year. Well, that's not always the case as you get into the swing seasons. But if you put in mechanical ventilation, you're going to be able to maintain that CFM throughout the year. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be in a natural level, not CFM 50? Because then you're already at the same pressure level. No matter what the temperature is outside, you're at a pressure level.
It's basically saying that at this particular CFM, you're converting that to natural ventilation throughout the whole year, but this is actually what they're measuring in natural ventilation.
Gotcha.
That makes sense?
Yeah, that's right.
So the house has the least natural ventilation in the spring?
They're saying when it's close to the temperature you're keeping it in your house, spring and fall, you're not going to have as much stack effect.
You know,
the pressure differences.
What I recently learned is also that if you have radiant heat, then you have less air infiltration because it doesn't circulate the air in the room. There's no convective loop. Therefore, there is no air rising next to the exterior wall, which produces less negative pressure along the wall. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah. Definitely. A lot of the new construction radiant homes, they end up getting like an HRV or some kind of mechanical venting. So I just pulled, Cameron pulled some numbers on our air sealing reductions over time. And so this just kind of shows you that when we do work, homes get tighter. We have proof of this. We know that air sealing jobs plus all the comprehensive work, you guys know how to do air sealing really well. Our average for like 2 years was 900 CFM, and there were a couple. These are basically months of the year, number of projects in that given month, and what the air leakage reduction average was. So you see, like this month we got like over 1,200 average. There was a couple that were more around 800, but it's averaging about 900 CFM. So we know when you guys touch a house, it gets tight. And then this doesn't include looking at, well, what is it just for wall insulation going in? Or what is it just for windows? Or what is it just for doing the floor? This is just full air sealing packages. So we know houses get tighter when you work on them. And then here is the 62.2 calculation. So I'm going to go through this and tell me if it's too fast. But this is just to show you how to manually calculate it. But just know there are tools that you can plug numbers in and it'll pump out the number for you. So basically what we're trying to find out is what the fan is. What do we have to set the fan to? Okay, you want to measure what the total required ventilation is based off the building and the house, and then subtract out your infiltration credit, which is your blower door test. And what we get to do is we get to add a number to this, which is based on the local ventilation deficit, which is your already existing bath and kitchen fans. So what we need to know is how much air is needed for occupants in the home. So you multiply 0.03 times the floor area plus 7.5 bedrooms plus 1. Now, if you don't have a blower door test and you just want to estimate it, you can just do this calculation or look it up on this chart. So 1,500 square foot home with 3 bedrooms, you need 75. That's a pretty high number, you know, that we're used to like setting it to 30 or 40. So this is just a quick way. You don't even need a blower door. If somebody was like, if you're doing a clipboard, you're doing like the 100 points, somebody's like, what do you think I need? You just pull this chart up or just do this calculation. And there's also an online tool. You don't even need the infiltration. You want the infiltration credit though, because it's going to lower the amount that you need or maybe eliminate the need for it. So an example house, you got a 1,500 square foot home, 3 bedroom, 4 occupants. I put in here you want to use bedrooms plus 1 or the number of occupants. If you have 6 people living in a 3 bedroom house, you want to use 6. So blower door is 1820. So we go down here, we do this calculation: 0.03 times the floor area plus 7.5 times the number of occupants, we get 75. That's the same that was on that chart. 45 plus 30. Then you get your local ventilation deficit. So what they determined is that every kitchen needs 100 CFM and every bathroom needs 50. And then you basically subtract out what your real CFM is. And then you get a credit for operable windows. So each operable window in a bathroom or a kitchen gives you 20 CFM credit. So a kitchen that should have been 100 would only need 80 because you have an open window. Bath would only need 30, 50 minus 20. This number you add to your total. So let's say we had a kitchen that tested at 50 with an operable window and a bath fan tested at 40 with no windows. You do this calculation, you get 40 and you divide it by 4, and then that 10 CFM is what you add to your total. So instead of 75, we need 85.
Jason, I have a question regarding kitchens.
Mm-hmm.
They don't seem to differentiate between kitchens where they cook with gas versus kitchen where they cook with electricity.
Not for this.
I would think that there is more CO and other gases produced in the gas.
Yeah, I think there's really nothing in the calculation that has to do with the type of combustion equipment.
What about a kitchen with multiple windows?
You get 1 credit per room.
1 credit.
1 credit per room.
I'll tell you what, I've been using the air advice, and when you run the long-term tests, it's pretty fascinating to watch cooking times. The particulates are just sparking up like mad. And I remember a guy from Berkeley Labs was talking, who does a lot of research on IAQ stuff, and he was saying that kitchen fans are the main thing that we want to see in houses. We want to control what's going to speed the air cooking times.
Yeah.
So,
That's why it's usually you do work in a home, you talk to the homeowner, you want to say, hey, you should run your kitchen fan, your bath fan more often now. Your house is a little tighter. So what do you do with the infiltration credit? So they give you this formula. It's a constant times the blower door number times the story factor times this weather shielding factor. It's kind of similar to the M factor when you get down to it. There's a chart you can look up. Here's the story factor chart. I put this in here because if you're doing work in Clark County, they follow a BPA version of the 62 to 2013. And what they do is they take the blower number and just divide it by the M factor. They don't do this whole calculation. So this is for anybody who's working with a utility that's BPA affiliated. They have their own specs.
Jason, do we add a story if it's a basement? Or is it just above ground?
It's above ground.
Yeah.
If you have a basement that's got a daylight
Daylight,
basement,
yeah.
you could add a story to that.
Okay.
go back to our, and this is the weather and shielding factor that you can look up. Here's Portland 0.52. So take the blower, you take the constant times the blower door number. We got one story 0.52. We get 49. So we get to subtract 49 from what's required. If you're doing BPA, you get to take the CFM and divide it by their in factor, and you get 70. You get a lot more credit with the BPA. So now that we have this information, we can calculate what that Q fan or ventilation requirement is. We take that 10 and we add it to the 75 we get, so we have 85. Take the 10 that we calculated from our windows and fans, and then we take the infiltration. And you'll notice that this house needs 36 CFM continuous. If it was BPA, it was 15. And the handout I have in here has all the exact same calculation. Different example, but same stuff. All the charts that you need as well. So in our example home, just to kind of give you some comparison, this 1,500 square foot ranch, it's a 9.1 ACH 50 or 0.46 natural. That's 183% of the BAS. In our world that we're using right now, we don't need mechanical ventilation. It says we can actually bring the house down to 994, not needed. This is the world that we're living in right now. 62.2/2013 says, no, we want you to have 15 CFM, and you would need this much exchange in the house to not require it. That's with BPA adjusted. But the most conservative one with the 2013 says that we need, in the 30s, and you'd have to bring the house up. You'd have to have an infiltration rate of 3,360 in order not to be required. It's like a 15 ACH 50 or higher. So it's a lot more conservative house. So I can probably anticipate what you're thinking is like, wow, I'm going to have to ventilate every house. And this is kind of why programs like NYSERDA and BPA have developed their own standards. Any questions about the calculation itself?
Jason, what if a homeowner then says, I don't want to spend money on it?
We'll get to that. Okay, it's a good question.
No, I mean everyone. I can. It's silent in here because everyone's brain is turning, going, "Isn't habit going to require us to?"
I know.
So we'll get there today.
The spoiler is we're not going to require you that right now. And we're working on. We're evaluating this, getting feedback from everybody on. We want to do the best thing for the homeowner, but we're not going to switch over to this standard right now and say you guys have to do this. This would not be good for our program, and so we're taking a more methodical approach, like other programs. And actually, the Energy Trust, I talked with them. They haven't decided. They've been talking about it since 2010, and they haven't adopted any of these yet. So it's a challenge for any program to figure this out. We're trying to do the best thing with the building science out there, but what's practical for our, what's going to keep costs down, what's going to be practical.
Best thing for the client. Really.
What's the best thing for the client?
Well, so ETL has us handing out the MDL letter.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way they handle it.
That's the way they handle it.
Give the homeowner this information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of you all already have your own legal contractual language that you deliver to homeowners already, which is your own CYA. And, I like seeing that. That means that you care about the health and safety and you're covering your own backside with it.
Yeah.
Smart. It's an intelligent move and still staying current with, what standards and policies or standards are across the country.
It's hard, too, to try to find a standard approach for ventilation because it's going to vary so much across the country. I mean, if you talk to Paul Raymer, he says the same thing. He's been involved with the standard from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's not an easy task, and I think it's important for us individually here locally to be able to interpret this in a way that it makes sense for us.
Yeah. And remember at the beginning, the BPI was like, these are recommendations.
That's
Leave
right.
it to the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So which when we work with the utilities, we kind of lean more to the utility specs. But when the utilities don't have any specs,
Right.
like we develop our own standards based on our experience and the best practice. So we'll get there. We'll find a good middle ground. And I'm going to talk more about this at the end. So I put together this graph to kind of show you for our house, like here's the increasing blower door numbers, and then here's what we do now. Here's the BPA version. Here's 62 to 2013. You'll notice like this is when it zeroes out when you don't need any ventilation. So just to give you an idea, this is also the mechanical ventilation required. So if you were at 975, we'd have to put 20 in for this house. If you're at 975 for a BPA, you'd have to put 50 and you'd have to put 60 in. So if we go to our house was like 1820, so we don't need anything for the current BAS calculation, but we need around 20 for BPA and we need 40 or 37.
Seems hard to justify air sealing when you have to do this.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, what's the point?
I think mainly it's like the idea is you're controlling where the air is coming from.
Are you? You're just putting the fan in, you're still pulling air in from outside.
If you seal that floor and attic super well, which we know can be hard to do, then the house will try to pull it from leaks around windows or doors, ideally. That's whenever I'm in a house and a homeowner's like, oh, I can see light around my door. And I'm like, well, you just dropped your house by 2,000. That's a good place to pull air from.
Totally.
But the homeowners don't really see it that way, but that's kind of how I think. Like, I have a mailbox, one of those mailbox holes in my wall, and that's my Fresh 80. I love that thing. It just makes as much air. So,
Unless you live by bullseye glass.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't want to breathe it. Yeah.
This gives you a comparison of what it is for ACH 50. So if we're at our 1820 home, we're at ACH 50 of around 7. So, even at a 7 ACH 50, this is saying we need 40 CFM continuous. And we're all used to this. Like if you're at 7 ACH 50, that's good. You're getting the 35% exchange rate. That's where we want you to be. This is a complete deviation off of that. It's not 35% of the volume of the air exchanging anymore. So this is the kind of the piece I was trying to wrap my head around.
I think, Clyde, the point that you make is a really good one. And if any of you have gone to ACI National in the past couple of years, this is a really kind of contentious, debated, issue. I mean, people are literally yelling at each other in rooms about this. And you have companies that are pushing a product agenda versus regulatory agencies that are pushing a health and safety agenda. And it is a really contentious issue. So just understanding it from a building science perspective and how we all have to work within those bounds. That's exactly what Jason wanted to deliver today, is that understanding to everyone.
The other part is to be able to explain this to a homeowner.
It's so hard.
Justify
Yeah.
the whole action.
Just a simple $3,500 investment.
Yeah.
And a little for air sealing because we got
Easy sell.
So talking with Dennis, and actually Bill Krause works with the state of Washington on low income stuff. Low income, they require this on every house. They have to leave behind materials for the homeowner to explain like how it works, and they have to have a shut off switch and all this. But what I was talking to Bill about is like a lot of people don't understand. He's constantly trying to explain why they need it, but they don't have to pay for it. In our world, we're saying you need this, and we need to charge you $500+ to put this in. So it's a little different for us. I understand why they're leaning on the conservative side, but it's challenging when we're trying to sell it to a homeowner. I think a lot of us know how to sell mechanical ventilation. A lot of people need it anyway. A lot of people have old fans and aren't connected right. But there are people out there, and you guys have talked to them, who are adverse to having something running all the time in their house. So it can be a challenge. A couple other things out of the standard. You have to meet the whole building ventilation needs. So if it says 37, you got to provide 37 continuous, or you got to do the how many minutes an hour does my 80 CFM fan need to run. So you may only need to run 15 minutes an hour, and you can put a smart switch in. Local exhaust can be used as an exhaust only strategy, so you can put a Panasonic fan in, set it to 30, and that's a local exhaust only strategy. That's acceptable. We don't need to put in HRVs in every house. Obviously, balanced system, whole building ventilations are optimal. They have to be labeled with controls, and they have to have documentation for the device left with the homeowner. This is pretty industry standard for any mechanical device you put in the home. Read the documentation, give them a tutorial, make sure they understand it. Anything running continuously should have a one zone or less. Most of the stuff coming out now is pretty low zones. If you put one that's only running intermittently, like 15 minutes an hour, you can actually go to 3 zones.
Guys, do you have recommended sources or technologies that are not too expensive but work well?
Yeah, I put together not on this slide, but I got a list, a website with good products on there that you can use.
Good.
So this is what I was talking about at the beginning. There are a lot of strategies out there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into all the products. If you guys want to talk about them during this time, I'm more than open to it. You got balance type systems, HRVs, or you can do an ERV in the house that would be appropriate in. You got the exhaust only methods. You can put in a continuous rated fan. But the Panasonic has a lot of these built in. With you could do the calculation. It needs 40 CFM, and you say, "Sweet, set it to 40," and you're done. A little bit of explanation to the homeowner, and you're good to go. You can put time delays in. Smart switches, this one's pretty common. If they got a fan that's fairly newer and it's already set up, you can set this in and set it to run 15 minutes an hour, 80 CFM, you're good. I put in fresh 80s because you can add in like a fresh 80 source in combination with exhaust only. Is everybody familiar with fresh 80s or seen them used? Basically just Cameron's got a few of them in his house.
It's a dampered hole.
Dampered hole in the wall. I think you can shut them off.
Yes,
you can shut them off during the freezing times. The case study I'm going to go over, the guy had 4 of them in there, so let's see what couple of them. And then you can also go with fresh air intake. This is kind of what I'm used to seeing with the Earth Advantage homes, where they duct the fresh air intake on a damper to the return, and then they wire it to some Honeywell controls that control the bath fan and the air handler. So it's like bath fan comes on, turn on the air handler, open the damper, and pull fresh air into the return. That's one of the most common strategies I've seen in new construction because it's cheaper than an HRV setup. I've actually been in a couple of Washington homes. I think in Washington they require this. But the ones that my brother bought a house up there, and the damper actually wasn't on any type of control. It was just cranked whatever you want, and his was like shut. And so that was like the first time I saw one of those.
Which is good for AC.
Yeah.
Right?
So it would say like spring, summer, winter on it. And you would just go whatever time you want to do it.
It can help radon too. It's a balanced ventilation system.
Yeah, you're diluting some of the air. I don't know if it actually reduces the radon levels or not, but I would think that probably when we talk to radon professionals, they're going to recommend mitigation.
It could actually pull.
Yeah, and from what I've read from like the EPA website is like just opening windows isn't enough to dilute.
Well, I read the opposite. Opening windows does wonders for reducing radon. The problem is that in the winter people don't open.
Yeah, you got to think wintertime conditions. Yeah. So I would never sell any of these products as a radon solution.
Sure.
It's different. We're talking about soil gases, so
Catch them before they get.
yeah, you want them out of the house before they come in. But it helps having ventilation.
You know, one of the things I'm trying to do on my projects when folks aren't willing or don't have the funds to buy a fan for their bathrooms, I'm trying to at least put a timer on in every house.
Yeah.
That's kind of my goal is to make sure everybody has a timer and knows 30 minutes after your shower.
You just put the switch on. It says like 15, 30, 60. Yeah, that's a pretty common one. I also like the humidistat switches.
Yeah, but they require 4 wires.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't exist in a lot of houses.
Okay. Yeah, and this Panasonic is a lot more wiring than just wiring a regular fan. I know I have 2 of them in my house, and pain in the butt to install these. And I've even seen some electricians get tripped up by them. So, like, that's the kind of thinking you guys go through every day is like, I'm working with this house. What's the best scenario? Does anybody have a go-to product that they like for ventilation strategies?
HRVs,
HRV?
but if the budget doesn't allow it, let's continuously running bath fans are alright.
Yep.
Okay.
Seen lots of Panasonic fans just because they're kind of solid devices going in. EFI has a really good list of products. I put a link on here. It's got like everything you can think of. You could build the fresh air intake dampered mechanical control with the stuff that we put in. I've actually seen Essential Air from Pyramid put a couple of these in over the years, but not as commonly now. Most people are going exhaust only. But you can look at the type of equipment. They have like an AMCA or HVI rating. And again, try to get something 1 cylinder or less so you can run it continuously. So a couple issues to watch out for. You'll notice on the side, like there's some critical issues here. And I wrote at the bottom, like ventilation. I don't care how much you ventilate a house is not going to solve the source problem. So it's really important to pay attention to things in the home, which you guys are all used to. If you're adding mechanical ventilation, especially when you put a kitchen fan in, you're going to change the dynamics of the house. A lot of those kitchen fan ranges can go up to 300 or higher with a high setting. So you want to pay attention to that. If you're doing a work scope and they got a natural draft water heater and it's passing now, and they're like, well, I really want the range and I want a continuous fan, you may want to start prepping the homeowner. Like, look, we're going to change some issues in your house, and your water heater may not pass. So that's always a difficult one to handle, but something to keep in mind. Discuss options with the client for incorporating this. This is kind of the sales piece of this. That you're prepping the homeowner for what's the best fit, and then test the systems that are installed. This is really critical. You can install the best system, you don't test it, it may not work.
I want to echo that again too. And there's a lot of standards have changed over the years, and Jason did a great job showing the timelines. But the ethos that runs through all of us with building science, we've been trained to a belief system or a philosophy. And as time has gone by, we may have developed bad habits to not test everything. And one of the case studies that Jason is going to show here, that simple matter of fact at the end, testing to make sure that you've done it right, will save you thousands of dollars. And so just don't forget that, and don't forget what you learned when you first were kind of indoctrinated into the world of building science. Test in, test out. Even though it's different the times when we test in and test out today as what we were trained originally, just don't forget those things.
You want to leave instructions for the client. And again, we're not going to solve these problems. And even in the ASHRAE standard, it says this is not a replacement for solving source issues. It's just the recommended ventilation to maintain the air quality in a normally functioning house. So some really great tools out there for if you want to start playing with this immediately. This is my second favorite one, which is this Residential Energy Dynamics online calculator. You can just go on this today. You could say red calculator ASHRAE 2062 and it'll pull right up. You just go in here, put in this information about the home, and you're going to get a CFM number that you need. It'll also tell you can calculate, well, if I only run it, if it's 80 CFM, how many minutes of the hour do you need to run it? And it'll calculate it for you. It'll also tell you how what would your blower door number need to be in order for no mechanical ventilation to be required. There's also an Excel calculator you can download. It's like $3, which is also a good one if you don't want to use an online tool. You can do this in the house. It's really easy to fill out. We've also incorporated this into our threshold tool that replaces the workbook, so it'll calculate not only the BAS that we're familiar with, but it'll calculate this for you as well. So some folks are already starting to use this, but this is a little sales pitch that you can use threshold to basically calculate all these things. Just put the data in. It takes 5 seconds. Boom, you know what ventilation the house needs. All right, a little bit, 2 case studies. I like case studies, so I found 2 of them for you guys. These are all projects that we had Clean Energy Works did the work on. Homeowner called back 2 years or more later with a problem. So, first house, 1.5 story bungalow, 1920s home. You guys can picture this in your mind. A little half story. Had 4 separate knee wall cavities. That's always fun. Medium occupancy, 4 occupants. We did that project in 2012. The contractor didn't do anything wrong on this project. There was only a couple issues. Well, I preface that with there was a couple issues. They missed insulation in one bay in this garage that had a heated living space over it. And that's why the homeowner called us back when we found some other problems. They actually did the calculation. It was 130% of BS as an ACH 50. They recommended and gave the homeowner a scope of work to put a continuous fan in. The homeowner said, I don't want it. When the guy called up, what happened is they missed. There was a real weird framing in this garage. It was like a quarter of the basement. And they had dense packed the walls between the garage and the basement and then the floor above it. They missed a bay because of the framing. They thought they had filled the whole thing. So the guy went in there, started doing some work, and found it was missing. So then he called and said, I want you to look at everything because I feel like I paid for all this work and the stuff was missing. And I was like, okay, we'll come back out. Contractor agreed to come out and put the insulation in. That wasn't a problem. So I went out and I was like, let's just look at all the work. So he was telling me when I was there that there was a lot of humidity in the home, and he had a humidity meter that said 70 to 80% on average. I was like, that's way too high. Like, I was like, how long has that been going on? Well, for about 2 years. I was like, that's not good. So we went and looked in the knee wall cavities, and I found some surface level mold in there. This goes back to what we were talking about is, you're seeing mold, how do you talk to the homeowner about it? So it's real surface level. This cavity was actually not ventilated. And the reason it wasn't ventilated was because of the SHPO. They couldn't put, it was kind of got caught up in that, and the homeowner, they were like, we don't want to put a roof jack there. And we just gave them a waiver. Even if it was ventilated, it wouldn't have solved the problem in this house. The humidity in the house was way too high. So when we went out and look, I took this hatch off. It was swelled shut. It was a particle board, and it absorbed all this moisture over like 2 years. Here's his humidity meter. When I was there in the summer, it was 59%, so it was good then. But he said when he looked at this thing every day in the winter, it was 70 to 80%. There was no exhaust fan in the house. So I was like, they're going to fix the insulation problem, but I was like, you need to install a continuous fan, and you need to try to reduce this moisture problem. And they recommended it to you, and you chose not to do that. So like now it's time. You don't want this to go on for another 2 years. So he agreed, and we got it hooked up with a contractor, and they put in a mechanical venting, and he had his gutter. The main problem was the gutters on the outside of the house were draining too close to the foundation. He had old 20s foundation, and it was just wicking into the house, plus the occupants. So all this source load in the home. So he got that fixed, put in the mechanical venting, and they actually put a vent in that knee wall space, and the problems are gone now. So looking at the numbers, same as our example home, this house tested in at 5,600 and tested out at 1974. It's a huge drop. They did the weatherization really well. But when we left, it was like 7 to 8 ACH 50. So in our world, it's meeting the ventilation requirements that we need. If we measure it up to the new ones, 62.2/2013 said you should have been running something at 37 CFM. For this house, this would be better. But at the time, this was our standard. But we still said, hey, you should put mechanical ventilation. But he said he didn't want it. So what's really important here is that you document when a homeowner is saying they don't want something. And we're talking about putting together some kind of template format that you can use. It says, hey, we're informing you that your house is at this. This is what's recommended, and you're choosing not to do it. We gave you an option to do that.
Jason, is that continuous ventilation? Or?
Yeah, these are all continuous. Yeah. So, good outcome. The guy was frustrated in the beginning, but we ended up finding another problem that we kind of helped create, but we still told him he should have put that fan in the beginning, and it was actually documented really well by us and the contractor. It was on their original bid. You know, we did. Sometimes you won't hear from a client for 2 years. How often does this happen to you guys? A year or two later, a client calls you up and says, "We're having this problem now. We want you to come take a look at it." I'm seeing people nod their heads. It happens to us 4 to 6% of the time.
Saw some insulation coming out of the supply in 2 years.
2 years after. Yeah. So what's a workmanship warranty that you guys have? Like 1 year? Some people it's 5. 2 years. Big message out of this is set up an expectation, homeowner. You can call me at any time if you think there's an issue with your house. That may make some of you guys nervous, but it's really not that big of an issue. Just set it up as, here's what we recommend, here's what we did, you're documenting stuff, you're setting it, you're educating the homeowner, you're setting expectations, you're saying, you know, you hear, like, if something weird's happened with the fan installed, and you feel like you're looking at humidity, it's rising, give us a call. We'll come out and take a look at it. That could prevent a 2-year problem. This whole thing, if this homeowner had freaked out about this mold, this could become, instead of like I think they spend maybe about $1,200 fixing this. They didn't even clean this off. It was surface level. It dries up. This could become a $10,000 problem because you got a homeowner's freaking out. I want my house remediated. I want you to take out the insulation units. I mean, I've seen people 180 flip on this and start freaking out. So luckily we caught, the homeowner talked to us about it. It was reasonable. We got this fixed for him.
What did you have to do?
Huh?
What all happened?
We hooked him up with another contractor that put in a continuous rate fan, and we set it to like 40 or plus. They came in and put a vent in that attic, and then you had the gutters fixed.
And then what was his humidity level?
I don't know. I know it's down because he hasn't had any problems since. Okay, here's the second one. Jim's going to be familiar with this. This was a one-story ranch house, so a little bit smaller home. Small homes tend to they amplify moisture issues really quickly, like apartments. It's a 60s ranch, pretty basic ranch. Homeowner did a project in 2010, called in 2013, 3 years later, and says, I got mold in my house. I got moisture on my windows. All the windows had so much moisture was getting on those single pane windows, and it was sitting on the frame and like discoloring the wood, and there was some looked like black growth on there. Guy started talking about litigation and saying some red flag things. So I was like, let's go take a look at it. And I don't know if Jim, you came out with me on the first visit.
I did.
I think so I talked with Jim, and we went out there together to take a look at it because I wanted a contractor to see like what kinds of things we would bid on. So this home was a lot tighter. It's still 7 ACH 50, but it was 73% of the BS. So this is the recommendation zone that we're in. And they actually installed a nice fan in this house. It was an 80 CFM fan. It was on a bath timer. It ran 15 minutes. I did all the math. They did everything right with that. They put in fresh 80s. They're about 20 CFM a piece. And the homeowner kept saying, like, the thing clanks. It's been clanking for 3 years. And he keeps getting all this buildup of moisture on his windows. He's like wiping the moisture down all the time. I looked down the crawl space. There wasn't any standing water in the crawl space. He didn't have a roof leak. It was just he had about 4 people living in this small home, a lot of occupants, and we found out that this fan it wasn't working. And what had happened is when they installed it, they put a nail in and it hit the damper, and the damper never would open. So the clanking was the damper hitting the nail. And so he had actually called the original contractor, who's now out of business, but they basically told him it was supposed to sound like it. So if they had just said, well, let us come take a look at it and make sure we installed it right, we could have avoided all this problem 3 years later. So he didn't, homeowners sometimes don't know how to talk to you guys and maybe not describe stuff well, or maybe it's the way they're talking, they sound anxious. You guys are anxious, it's your business, you don't know what you're getting involved in. It's really good to have an open communication and say, it sounds like you're having a problem, can we schedule time, I'll just come by and look at it. It's a fact-finding mission.
Yeah, and remember, you have the tools to test.
You bring out some of your tools, a humidity meter, your fan flow, or try to get a little bit of information. We're happy to mediate in those situations. And it's better to hit that thing early on than wait 2 years down the road, trust me. And when I got it, when we looked up in the attic, there was a little bit of mold growing around where the exhaust connected to the roof. And I think it's related to it was never opening right. Maybe it wasn't sealed really well, and there was some like warm, moist air getting up there and just condensing right there. So Jim put together a bid to replace the fan, put in a nicer fan, set continuous. We reducted it. They cleaned up the windows for the guy, and ended up. He said as soon as that was fixed, problem was gone.
Gene.
Problem was gone. That just needed to ventilate. So when we look at the numbers, we stack up the numbers again. This house is a 0.37 ACH natural or a 7.350. Pretty low on the BAS scale. So we were below the BAS, so that's why it's saying you need 16 continuous. It's just that all we had to do was recommend it. Then when you hit the BPA, it's 33, and then 62.2 was 49 CFM. I don't remember what we set it to. I think we set it to 40 or something like that. We kind of doubled this, make sure it would work. And these fresh 80s work really good. They have a little string on them. You can open and close them. And he said once that fan was working, he could feel fresh air come in, and all that problem with his windows was gone. And then at the end, we've got a homeowner that's happy. They see us taking care of the problem. His ideas about litigation dissolve. He feels better about what he purchased. It's hard to return a home performance project. It's not like buying something at the bakery and not happy with it. It's really hard to say, I'm not happy with this.
You probably spent a lot less on a fan than you would have on a lawyer, too.
Spent a lot less money on getting this fixed and going through any problems like this. So some best practices. So we're getting ready to wrap, getting close to the end here. Inspect and test the existing or installed mechanical installation. So this is actually Jim testing this fan that he installed. So here it is at 78 running full blast, and here it is at 34 running continuous. So I know there's different testing methods, and some people have debated which testing methods you should do. This is a perfectly acceptable way of finding out if you're within the tolerance. So this test right here takes less than 5 minutes to run. A lot of you guys maybe used to put a piece of paper up there, see if it holds. That's not really enough. It's an indication that if you're going out and you're like, your fan's not working right, and you put a piece of paper up there and it's not holding, okay. But put this up there and actually see what it's running. Because when you have a problem like this, it's worth doing a little bit of calculations and testing. Identify the existing IAQ issue and source. You got to find out where that's coming from. You may not be able to completely solve it, but you need to know where it's coming from to the best of your ability, so that you can inform the client. You've got rainwater dumping next to your basement. You've got pipe leak. You've got 6 occupants and 3 dogs in a 900 square foot home. Just find out where that's coming from. Being conservative, you could calculate the higher end standard. Make recommendations, educate the homeowner, set expectations about what you are able to do and what you can't do. And then if you do install it, make sure they have documentation, they understand how the controls work, because people can disable the controls. Make sure you just document conditions, recommendations. And then this is the thing I've said a couple times. Let the homeowner know they can contact you if there is an experience or issue. Does anybody have a problem with this statement? How often do you guys, I know we talked about, you've had a couple people call you up, but like, how many times do people take you up on warranty issues or callbacks? If you had to give a percentage.
Not very often, but I think people feel pretty comfortable calling if there is an issue.
Yeah. We see about 4 to 6% callbacks.
We'd like to see that lower.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple industry like HVAC guys. They say they get like 10% callbacks because they're like, thermostat's not working. It could be any variety of things. The ones that we're measuring are kind of the big escalations where they're like rabbit holes to go down and untangle, like these case studies. But it's still a pretty low percentage. You do 100 projects, you get 4 people that call back. Some of them are easy to solve, some of them are more complicated.
Some are just non-issue.
Some of them are, non-issues. Some of them are inspectors coming in behind us. They're getting ready to sell their home and they're noticing things. Some of it's confusion.
My friend said,
Yeah.
they talked to the person.
I'd say that one of our big values is that we know how to talk people through that, because sometimes their idea of what's wrong is distorted, or they come from a place of anxiety. Like my friend came out and said, you guys didn't put the right type of insulation in, or the furnace is like a bad furnace. So there's a lot of information out there, and sometimes we can decipher that and maybe mitigate that. But if there is a legitimate problem, maybe we come back to you guys and say, hey, we need to work together to figure this out.
I'd make a comment here that it's been amazing to watch Jason develop his skills, and he is a master at mediating these type of interactions. He has become so skilled at calmly working these folks down and using the science to create good solutions. And he's worked very closely with all of you. And I mean, the example with Jim on this one is great. That's just one example. But so if you run into these issues and you have a very contentious customer, know that you do have some solid resource inside these walls to help support you on your projects. So.
Yeah.
And I want to say that we didn't create that problem.
No, we actually had the homeowner sign a legal document so that there wasn't issues advocates involved. So, yeah, thanks, Ryan. And actually, a lot of the advisors do a lot of the same stuff. I've handled some of the testier ones. Can't say that they're the funnest thing that I get to do, but
They're pretty good at it.
they get people. There's a lot of sensitivities around this. When you drop, if you guys spent $13,000, $20,000 on something, you're not happy with it.
Yeah.
Some of these people have sat with that for years and years, and it's better to catch that early on.
If I may say, I want to echo what Ryan said, that you have really good skills in
Thank you.
and remaining calm and going through touchy subjects and processes between the homeowner and the contractor, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's one of the big added values of the program, that the homeowner has the peace of mind that if anything goes wrong, you guys are there to help.
Yeah, we're more than happy to help. Sometimes we can solve it in 30 minutes of a conversation. Sometimes, we just do these best practices and can solve these IAQ issues and never have the homeowner call back. And you guys do this stuff every day really well. I know these 2 cases that I showed are fringe cases of problems that happen, but they're good to just kind of keep them in mind and avoid them. I know there's a lot of people in this room that have had to untangle some hairy stuff. So, So this is kind of goes back to Peter, your original question, and a couple others. Is like, what is our policy? We have the eligible measure policy, which basically describes our requirements for scopes of work, diagnostic testing, technical standards. We're the source of the source when we point to BPI for diagnostic testing, auditing. We point to the Energy Trust for when we're dealing with utilities. We also point to BPA because they have their own specs manual. We're working on this effort as we're working on how do we align with BPI 1200 because this is one of the things we tout to clients is that it differentiates us from them just hiring any contractor to work on the home. We're saying, look, all of our guys and contractors have at least one person who's a BPI auditor, and we are also certified that we speak the same language, and we're qualified to actually evaluate these homes and make sure that we can catch these issues. It's a big distinguisher. So we're working to align with this, and I think, right off the bat, you guys can start using the new CAS-zone testing. You can go to your next job and use this procedure, and we're completely cool with that. We don't require diagnostic testing at the initial assessment. We require it when the work scope's dependent. I know some of you guys still test at the 100 point. Some of you guys will maybe feel somebody out and come back and test when you're developing the bid. That's kind of a business decision. You can charge for diagnostic testing if you have a homeowner that wants that before they do a bid. Go ahead and tell them what it costs. And then we require at least one BPI auditor. So if you have a new person coming on staff, they're going to learn the new BPI 1200 standard and get certified through that. It's actually the test is actually trimmed way down, and I put on the back of that pamphlet that shows you what all the things you have to cover in that test. And then we're still using the BAS guidelines until we completely evaluate all these ventilation strategies and get feedback. And one of them is working with the Energy Trust to see, kind of talk with them about what they're going to do, and then getting feedback from you guys. And we want to find some reasonable strategy that's not going to basically push tons of jobs away. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't start using this ventilation assessment right off the bat. You can use it as the most conservative option for a homeowner. If you get a homeowner that has IAQ issues or an occupant sensitivity or a client requesting some kind of better strategy, go ahead and calculate this and say, well, what this is saying is you don't need any, but if you want us to go to the higher standard, we would put in a 30 CFM fan. Can you guys see that play out in the sales process? Mm-hmm. I haven't really thought through how that would work, but you could. I know there's some clients that even ask me, is like, what should my ventilation be? And they're real focused on it. And then you can basically show them options.
So Jason, this fence can be timed and not running continuously?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. One of the things is we're pretty much requiring diagnostic testing on any shell package right now, and I know that puts some, sometimes we're following the old BPI standards. Even if you do the attic, you have to run the testing. We're looking at a proposal of maybe trimming it down to if you do 2 or more shell measures. So if you do attic in the floor and you're doing prescriptive ceiling, then you require the testing, or windows and wall insulation or wall insulation in attic. Or any whole home air sealing package, you require it, and if you're doing duct sealing, and these are the tests out of BPI 1200 that we would require. So this is kind of the proposal that we're looking at.
More of the 15% touching the surface.
What's that?
You're going away from more of the 15% shell.
That's an old BA standard thing that we've been using, and they have dropped. So we're looking at this maybe being a new approach, and I think it may work better with some of the work scopes you put together. I don't know. This is the proposal. Do you guys have any feedback on this? Just looking at this.
Well, I think it's pretty smart. We all know. We all know about that moisture issue. None of us want that liability, and so we're not going to be tightening up a house more than we're comfortable with and just leaving it. So I don't know that you guys necessarily need to require us to
Right.
do these tests. We're already aware of it, of the need. So two measures makes good sense.
And we have some partners we satisfy. We work with their utilities. We're also working to become an Home Performance Energy Star partner. So we're kind of working through how all that kind of plays out. Because we like the sale to the homeowners. Like, look, we're not going to just do this, but we're going to actually test to make sure your house is safe and worked right. But then it does a certain amount of scope of work, not require it. And I know when you guys see it required, some people are charging for it in their bid, and that's fine. All right, that brings us to the end. Any questions? Any questions online?
We'll put it out there right now. We got a number of folks online, so if there are questions, feel free to type in on IM, and I'll unmute you. But nothing right now.
A lot of content in these slides.
Are you sharing this?
I'll share the whole presentation.
Yeah, I've recorded everything today. The audio, the video, the slide deck. I'll edit that, put it up on YouTube channel, forward it to all of you guys. Same way that I do with the contractor calls. You'll have access to the slide decks. So if you just want to go target the slide deck, there are links within the slide deck as well. So those will be live links on the PDF documentation.
If you want digital copies of the handout, we can get that too. I know you guys are busy. If you have time to read through it kind of describes the changes really quickly, and the procedures for testing are in there. It's kind of a nice guide to have. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email us. We'll go over them.
Yeah, and for an organization like Neil Kelly, you've got a lot of staff. For the few of you that were able to attend, feel free to remind folks that those resources are online. They can access them. So please openly share internally with your staff.
Yep. All right. Appreciate everybody coming out and taking some time today. So feel free to let us know if you have any questions or if you have thoughts about other Techie Breakie subjects that you guys want us to cover. Let us know.
And we'll see you guys next month for a new one. Yeah.
Thanks, Jason. Thank you.
All right.